We greet each of you in the love and in the light through this instrument. I am QO. Today you asked about the difference between the mind of the world and the mind and functioning of the heart, and how one may access the mind of the heart and become aware of the extended functioning of this particular central organ of our physical vehicle. We are most happy to address this query and will begin by suggesting that for most of you, the nature of the mind of the world is quite well known, for each of you has been, shall we say, encultured with this mind. For it is the means by which entities of your various countries, cities, and religions are made familiar with the expectations of a growing being within your culture, or any culture for that matter, my friends. This is the means by which the mass mind of the population of your culture is passed on to each succeeding generation, so that there is a certain kind of order available to the entire culture, the expectations of which are specifically transmitted by those closest to you, those being your parental entities, your teachers, your friends, neighbors, and so forth. In this day and age, this is accomplished quite successfully by the increasing use of the electric media, which ensues that the message of conformity is well spread, shall we say, and taken into the mind complex, which is processed through the physical brain. Thus, each entity begins the physical incarnation of the basic elements of the process of becoming one of many that can be looked to in order to understand the necessary ingredients for being accepted within the various segments of your culture. Thus, one is able to take advantage of various opportunities for education and socialization, the occupation and the earning of the means by which to facilitate the growing family. The process is meant to be cyclical and enhanced with each generation's production of new progeny. This, as you are well aware, is the momentum of the mind, which causes the entity who wishes to proceed upon a different path some resistance, shall we say. For each entity, though well prepared to pursue the cultural bias, is also the, shall we say, seed bed in which there grows the individual identity that seeks expression in many and sundry means. This self finds the cultural bias occasionally difficult, if not a burden, when this individual identity takes on facets of expression that are not generally understood by the larger culture, or perhaps even by the smaller culture of the family and friends. Each has within its heart, shall we say, the desire to pursue what you may call the seeker's path, the desire to know more of what is the meaning of life, the whys and wherefores that are not covered over much by the mind of the world. This is where the mind and functioning of the heart is most important. The societal complex in which you all participate carries with it a complex set of expectations that, as we have suggested, most often do not precisely fit the process of opening up to the larger experience that every individual feels as a need and a desire at some level of the being. The gap, shall we say, that exists between the world as it has come to be represented normatively to the aspiring self, and the world as it is felt to call from somewhere deep within the aspiring self, is a gap which is fed by many things, articulated in many ways, kept as a gap by a great many factions. Of these factors, we would call attention to two major callings. The one kind, coming from what you might call judgments of value, which have become sedimented in your social complex, yield a structured set of requirements that are held before every individual self in such a way that in order to be worthy, the self is expected to conform to a pattern of selfhood which is already in place. As it happens, this pattern of selfhood virtually never is a perfect fit for any individual self, and as a result, every individual self, almost without exception, feels in some corner of its being that it has failed, that it is unworthy. When this judgment lies heavy upon the self, it causes that delicate membrane, so to speak, that constitutes the skin of the embryonic self to contract, to pull inwards, and to tighten itself into a small knot. In this condition, the embryonic self finds itself locked into a heart center, which is no center, and which cannot express itself as heart. There are, nevertheless, leavings, traces, residues of judgment. The fragments of judgments and feelings of inadequacy that persist from one experience to the next, that accumulate over time to form very often quite a rigid crust. The embryonic self finds some degree of safety hiding behind this crust, but at the same time feels trapped by it. Every experience in which the judgment of the world is taken in and held against the self causes this crust to become firmer, to become more brittle, to become more imprisoning for the self that would prefer to feel itself to be free of judgment, to be free of that kind of demanding expectation that the world continually seems to place upon it. This imprisoned self, however, is not without resources of its own. Over and over again, it will make an effort. Over and over again, it will look to find those little apertures in the incrustation around it, which will give it life, and which will lead the light of the world flow in, even as the inward light of the self begins to flow outward. With every additional act of acceptance of self by self, the crust begins to thin so that over time, when the process is consciously empowered, eventually the crust may become thin enough that it no longer holds the heart in a constricted space, and the heart is allowed to expand and to inform the world with its love, When the heart reaches outward to the world in love, the world is reflected back as love, lovingly, and heart then begins to sing that song which is its native tongue, so to speak. There is, as we have said, a second source of constriction of heart energy, and this source comes more from within. It represents those experiences which have proven to be too painful for the emerging self to continuance, to bring forward, to be felt. And so there is a tendency to postpone, if you will, the feeling of the thoughts, the feeling of the feelings, and the feeling of the pain that is very often a part of the process of catalysts that each here enjoys upon a daily basis. Postponed feelings, however, are not feelings that go away forever. Postponed catalyst remains within the heart center as work yet to be done. And a heart that is burdened with much unprocessed catalyst, with much unfelt feeling, is a heart which feels laden and heavy and suffers from structures of its own making. In some sense, my friends, we will say to you that this catalyst is among the most difficult for you will need to process, for you cannot work through it without opening the heart. And each act of opening the heart, each act of releasing the tightness of the heart muscle, is an act also which releases those pent-up emotions, those pent-up memories, those pent-up repressions that have been felt at one point or another to be too difficult to deal with. So the opening of the heart is not always undertaken in a condition of absolute joy. The opening of the heart very often will show to the self what the self has not been able to confess it carries, the pain and the anguish or sorrow. The healing of anguish is something, however, that only the heart itself can accomplish. You cannot heal the anguish of the soul by thinking the correct thought any more than you can heal the damaged heart by a specific act of cognition. The heart is the organ of acceptance. It opens the gateway to a world which is loving at its core, but we will say that there are, in this love, many layers of what you experience as emotion, and the emotion does not always seem immediately to be of a loving nature, or to be of the nature of that which encourages a further opening of the heart. Accordingly, the first act of opening the heart can very often quickly lead to a reaction, which has the effect of closing it down again, or of restricting the area in which the heart will allow itself to be opened. This, my friends, is the moment where we would encourage you to look at the wee small act that might be called faith. For in this small act, there is the foolish expectation that within anguish there may yet be found joy, that within sorrow there may yet be found gladness. That within fear, within horror, within agony, there may yet be found hope. The more one learns to expect joy as a consequence of merely one's capacity to hope, the more one is able to relax that heart muscle, the more one is able to allow acceptance to build upon acceptance, until the heart feels itself to be an organ of reception for the ebb and flow of cosmic energy within the individual self. This is a refreshing flow for the self that has too long felt constricted, both from without by the heavy weight of the societal judgment, and from within by the weight of unprocessed and apparently unprocessable experience. When this cosmic wind, shall we say, is allowed to blow through the heart, and the heart itself learns to express the rhythms of the universe itself may increasingly be discovered to lie within. And less does the individual self need to feel itself as something that must maintain itself by resistance to what lies without. The natural flow of the heart corresponds and resonates with the natural flow of the cosmos. There are many ways that one can discover this flow. The artist discovers it in the act of creation. The naturalist discovers it in the act of participating in nature. And those who participate in the societal activities discover it in the natural flow of give and take as one offers one's services to others whose reception of these services is their gratitude, which in turn feeds back into the flow of the one who has given. The giving, the receiving, and the giving again constitutes the great flow in which every individual mind, body, spirit complex may participate and does participate more and more as the heart begins to open. In the opening of the heart, one may experience healing, and in the closing of the heart, one always experiences the constricting, not just of the mind, but also of the body. In your society, my friends, there are so very many factors working against the opening of the heart that it cannot be surprising that so many difficulties of the heart find themselves expressed in what you might call heart trouble. Sometimes you can make progress towards an opening of the heart itself simply by learning to relax the body. As you attempt to relax the body, it can sometimes be difficult to begin from the heart itself, for after all, this is a bodily function which you call autonomic, which is to say, it is a function which is not generally directly controllable by an act of consciousness. But if you begin in meditation to relax first the feet, allowing the feet to rest comfortably and gently upon the ground, allowing the feet to serve as receptors to that energy which flows from your earth upward so that it moves into your calves, through your knees and into your thighs, and into the lower part of your torso, through your knees and into your thighs and into the lower part of your torso, moving still upward through your solar plexus center, arriving finally at your heart, which now can be seen to have released a kind of tension which it did not know it was holding. One has thereby effectively achieved in bodily manifestation an analog of that of which we have been discussing in relation to the more metaphysical or mental components of the process of opening the heart. The resolve to open the heart must take root in the mind. For the mind is the original of the mind-body complex, but no mind can be shown to itself without that principle of manifestation which is called the body. When the mind is resolved in its heart to release those structures which it had held, the body is only too glad to comply and feeds back to the heart a joy of the release of the tension that has held it in check for oh so long. This experience of opening the heart can come very slowly, or it can come sometimes with a great rush. We find that if the experience is too sudden, it can sometimes lead to a kind of reaction or recoil, which has the effect of closing the heart again in due course. So it is well, my friends, to make a study of the practice of the opening of the heart, that it might mean something sustainable. A reliable, open heart is a resource for the seeker like no other, for it is the platform upon which all further work of a positive nature may be undertaken. It is that act of acceptance of self by self and of world by self, and the feeling of being accepted by the self and the world that allows the more radiant activity to begin to become manifest. An open-hearted person is, in your world, a rare jewel, but a jewel beyond price. My brothers and sisters, we commend you to the project of opening the heart, for it is an adornment to the entire creation when you do so. I am QO, and at this time we would leave this instrument in love and in light, and return to the one known as Jim to complete our communication with you today. Adone.